Question Everything was born out of a desire for curiosity, a love for people's stories, and a deep belief that through open and honest conversations, freedom can be found. Freedom from shame, from judgment, and from fear. So let's talk about the stuff we've been hiding from. Let's say the things we were told not to say. And let's ask the questions we've been wanting to ask, but have been too scared to. Because when we question everything, everything changes. Let's go.
Welcome to episode 2 of Question Everything. I am so grateful for everybody who turned into my inaugural episode, or if you haven't, go watch it now. When I launched that, it was actually on my birthday. So I was like, I guess just going all in on all the fun stuff, right? I felt like a kid on Christmas that was just so overwhelmed with just all the emotions. I didn't even know what to do with myself. So thank you for tuning back in. And I am so excited to continue this journey with you. So my thought right now, and who knows how this is going to turn out, right? Because it's my talk show, I get to do what I want, is to really follow up these episodes with a little bit more in-depth conversation from my perspective. I had my brother in last week where we really talked about complicated relationships, complicated by grief, where we really discussed what our grief process has been like with our father who passed away just over a month ago. So really wanted to share a little bit more as I am really continuing to go through just this really interesting process. So today's episode, I'm super excited to share something that I haven't shared with a ton of people yet. And that is the question that changed everything for me in this, decade long wrestling with this piece of my life with my father, and the question that stayed everything, and also how I'm really trying to stay true to that question. So often we can have these great awarenesses or these things that happen, and then life happens, right? We get caught up in these emotions. So how I'm really staying true. So excited to share that, but really wanted to start a little bit more talking about what was the relationship like with my father. Complicated can be very vague, and that's kind of in my intention, as I really want to share my story and what honors my truth, but also understanding that my dad is not here to speak for himself. And I want to honor that, but I also want to share my experience and that side of the story, maybe. I don't know. That's an interesting thought. But really kind of sharing what I feel comfortable with as I process this. And so um there, it was around when I went to college that everything kind of really started shifting between my dad and I. And, there's so many layers of what happened to our relationship. And, I'll share more as I go along throughout this series because it's a part of who I am. It's part of things I've struggled with. It's a part of insights I've had and part of why I'm a compassionate and kind and caring person. But really there was just so many layers that it was hard to pinpoint one. But I've come to the realization that if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's that we were fundamentally different people, with a different set of values that we held very, very close to us that ultimately led to a divide. We had a lot of non-negotiables. I had mine, he had his, things that we were passionate about, things that we weren't willing to budge on. And for me, I felt like I would have had to deny my humanity, a big piece of who I was, to meet his values. And that was just something that was not willing to do. And, looking back, I have to respect that that's what he wanted to do too, right? As passionate as I was about what I felt was right and what I valued in my life, he had that too. And as a father, he was without me, or excuse me, there throughout my childhood, and I'll always be grateful for that. But for the version of my father that I knew as an adult, that's the part that's a little harder for me. It's a hard realization when you realize that you just don't like who a person is, and it makes it even harder when that somebody is in your life. And Katie's my wife, we went to lunch after my dad had passed. We were both out of town, came back into town, and oh my gosh, I wish I knew what question she asked me, because again, questioning everything, right? The great thing as a coach is people see you coach and ask questions and they start to do it on yourself and you're like, I just got coached. But it was this realization of I didn't like who he was as a human. And he may have had that same feeling, right? But when you look at somebody and it's like, we're just fundamentally different human beings. And it was kind of freeing to know that, right? It's kind of freeing to know, hey, like I can't necessarily expect somebody to honor my values and let me have my peace and not do the same. But I don't know that we ever could have got over that. I don't know that that's something that we ever, I know I can't speak for him. I know I couldn't have, right? I wasn't willing to um, ignore things. I wasn't willing to set aside parts of my life. I just wasn't willing to. And so that's just a little bit more of how that goes. Again, no abuse, no trauma, nothing like that, but a lot of realizations as an adult as to who we were. And a lot of, again, I would have had to deny who I was as a human being to really, I think, ever really come to that middle ground. And so I'm so excited to share about this experience. So as I mentioned, I've been a really, I talked about this grief process, really felt like it started for me years ago, right? When somebody kind of exits your life as that figure, right? Example is like, a divorce. They say divorce is as hard as like a death, right? They exit that role as your partner, right? So you kind of start mourning. And then when they're gone, it's still sad, but you're like, I've mourned that person for years because they haven't been my father, my mother, my daughter, my son, my friend, my spouse, that piece. So um it was so I want to just kind of bump back to the weekend that my dad passed. He passed on a Sunday morning. And so I was in Miami, or West Palm Beach, I'm sorry, and just an amazing, amazing transformation, right? And in that time, I was able to ask myself a question, um, relatively out of nowhere that I've been wrestling with so long. So, Tracy Litt, who's a coach that I work with, she's a phenomenal human being. Check her out. Love this show came out of a coaching session with her. Get my butt kicked. So it was a powerhouse. It's an immersion retreat with about 50 or 70 amazing women from all over the world just doing fabulous work in the world, right? And doing all the work on themselves, which is what was so cool is, you think you may be going in to grow your business, to have a launch, to make X amount of money, and you leave and you're like, oh, it's just all about work on myself, which is how that goes. So I was there and great experience. And so I got a call from my uncle on Saturday morning, letting me know, hey, at any moment your dad's going to pass. And so, woke up with all the feels. And, at that point I had been with one of my roommates, or not one of my roommates, my roommate, Taryn, who, God bless her, she will always be special to my heart around this, but I hadn't really mentioned anything. And so that morning, a lot of the session, this theme started to emerge, right? Like, which is always funny, like if the universe gets you what you need or like stuff happens. And it was a lot of talk about people who had lost parents, or maybe they were estranged, and a lot of like an urge to, how do I have this, like, how do I reach back out to them? And a couple women had shared, hey, like, my parents are gone. Say how you feel, say what you want to say. Life is short, which we all know that. And like just a ton of breaks, right? I was like, oh my gosh. And it hit me. And I knew it was too late. My dad had quit taking calls, a week or so before. I just knew it was too late to have for me, right? He was on this planet, but it was too late. And then all these thoughts started coming up, right? I'm a bad daughter. What kind of daughter isn't there with their dad when they dies? And then it's like, I'm a bad human. Who does this? Who isn't devastated? Just all these thoughts of guilt and shame and blame. And I was just like, fudge. So feeling really heavy, started to share a little bit more because I was like, I got to get this out. And then we had a breathwork session, and breathwork can look all sorts of different ways. But this one was guided, and it was, again, 50 to 75 women in this room, lights are off, masks, like face masks are on, just this really primal, intimate moment, right? And where the idea is this breathwork, like getting your energy out of your body, moving it around, right? Just like, our breath is our power, right? So it was about an hour session of just like in and out, like breathe, move your body, all this. And so I went in with a super heavy heart. I went in, I think I don't know what I went in wanting to expect, but maybe more of like an idea of what do I do? How do I find closure? How do I do all this? Right. So I'm in the middle, about halfway through it. And out of nowhere, and this is the power of, I think, getting out of your mind, focusing on your breath, getting your energy through your body, right? I was like, what if I just decided to stop making this a thing, to stop punishing and going over and over and over and getting stuck on things that no longer mattered, but still really pissed me off. Quit going over right or wrong and shouldn't versus should, and really just decided to let the hurt, the pain go and just not do it anymore. And that is something that Holly before was not willing to do, because I'm very, very something I'm working on, principled on right and wrong. This is how you show up. And this, if this is what you say is your value, you got to freaking honor your value, right? Like all this stuff, and just like very, very judgmental, right? Very, very judgmental. But at that moment, what if I decided to just not make this a thing? I kid you not. I immediately I felt lighter. I had this huge smile on my face, and I even started laughing. I was just like, "Oh my gosh, what if that is what I just did? Just decided this is done. This is done. I don't need to beat, my mom talks about beating a dead duck. Like with dead horse, but anywho, um, but I had, I had Tracy talks about this other thing, like you beat your horse, you beat it, you bury it, and you come back and you like dig it up and you take it out and you beat it again, and you bury it, and then you sit around thinking about it. That's what I'd done. I was like, let's bury the horse, right? And then with this heart of just gratitude, just a heart of gratitude and genuine love. I wish my dad peace. I wish my dad joy. I wished him a happy journey to this next chapter for him, which is all I know he wanted in his life. And I meant it. I'd said it before. I want him, past, but there's always this piece of like resentfulness, right? And so I just wished him that. And I wasn't resentful or angry, but just a genuine, like, I see you as a human being without your faults, without my faults. I see you and I want this for you because you want this. And I sent him peace, which is such a grateful heart. And then I think what was such a powerful moment for this is having that liberation and then sharing with a group of women, just an extremely vulnerable moment. Women that a couple I'd met online in groups didn't know from anybody, right? Still to this day, there's women in that room that I did not talk to, right? But to share in a space. I raised my hand to share because I was like, I knew I needed to. I knew I needed, this was a part of my growth journey, right? To share something so vulnerable, because I had been guarded with my heart. I'd had my heart broken by my dad. And to be able to share something so personal to me in a space with people that I didn't know was such a bold move for me. And it was interesting. I remember raising my hand and I was like, oh, maybe she didn't see me. I'm not going to worry about it. Right. Like, oh, I tried, but of course she did. And I got the mic and just super calm. My heart rate went down, just like, and I shared. And again, I sent him these wishes. I announced it out. And then I was just so incredibly loved on by those humans that I will always forever be grateful for that. And my heart just busted right wide open, right? My heart was open. It was vulnerable. And again, after sharing that, that's like, can be very disarming, right? And so that was Saturday. And then, that next morning I woke up to a voice message from my uncle, letting me know my dad had passed that morning. So, less than 20 hours of having this moment, and sharing and like sending it out into the universe. It came back to me too, because I know that, he needed to hear that. People say all the time, somebody needs permission. And I think that, I'm going to share this in another episode. Like, I'm learning so much about the depth of sadness my dad had for our relationship that I didn't know. So I think he needed that. And, I think as much as he needed it, and I'm so glad that I was able to give that to him, that peace, that permission, a little bit of forgiveness. I don't know that I still believe I have forgiveness in my heart, which is not something I love to admit. But as much as he needed that, I needed that. I needed that so that we can both transition to whatever this next time looks like for us, right? I don't know what this is going to look like for me as I go in, but I feel a lot freer. I feel a lot lighter. And I know that he was able to feel freer and lighter and, go on to this next place. So again, I'll always be grateful and for that question that came up and in a space that then even pushed my edge a little more, right? To be loved on by relative strangers who just poured into me, and me to accept that and allow that was just such an opportunity to move into this next chapter. And so, yeah, that was kind of that question and that transformation. And I still feel that lightness, right? But I want to talk a little bit more about like, how do you keep going on when you have an awareness, an awareness like that? Like, yeah, it's great, but then now what? And so this is something that was really interesting to me. Um, excuse me, because I, you know, my brother, he calls me a principal adventure, right? Like I get really wrapped up in right and wrong. There's things that you do, there's ways you behave. It's more like etiquette and like kindness. And like there's just things that you do and you don't do. So when my values are threatened or when I see values that are not aligned with people, I get like super judgmentally. And again, something I'm working on because judgment serves nobody. I spent more time than I care to admit punishing and being the principal adventure with my dad. And what changed for me is I was having a conversation with my mom when I had gotten home from Florida. And I was like, I feel different in my body. It feels like my thoughts aren't so charged, right? My thoughts are curious, 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 compassionate. And I was talking to her and I was like, oh, I am processing over punishing. And those are two totally opposite feelings. I mean, they're as much as a boiling pot of water and an ice cube to me, those like different feelings, right? And I have spent decades punishing in my mind, though, right? Not him. For him, yes, some way him. Pulled back, didn't show my true self, wasn't myself with him. But so much time punishing. And I was like, I've been processing, and processing feels different, right? Processing feels light and open and kind. Punishment feels like hot and heavy and confusing. And it's interesting because even in that conversation, I had said that. And then I found myself getting caught up in some bullshit that doesn't matter from years ago, right? And I literally in my body could feel my heart constrict. I felt a little hot. And I was like, I could just feel it. And I was like, whew, that's me punishing, right? So how do I change that from a punishment to a processing? Because is this serving me or is this just some crap from the past? Because processing serves a purpose of growth and movement. And it feels, punishment just keeps us boom, 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 because we're never punishing the other person at the level that we're punishing ourselves, most likely, right? Punishment also turned me into somebody I was not proud to be, right? Somebody who was almost gossipy, like real, like wanting to prove a point. And I, after that moment of saying, do I let this go? That's what was key for me is I turned from from punishing to processing. And that has made an unbelievable amount of difference in my energy and my stress and my emotions, all of that, which are not just in this situation, right? I take that with me in my relationships and into work. Like we don't just carry all this crap with us around one topic, right? And so, that's something that I am continuously asking myself. And when I feel it in my body and it's around, thinking to my dad, I'm like, is this punishing or processing? And then if it is punishing, how do I make it into a processing? And that is my way to work on no longer making this a thing, because I have a ton of data, a ton of facts that I could make this a thing forever, but that's not what I want. My goal is to find that level of compassion and kindness that I show to everybody else for him. even when I may think the punishing part of me is that he doesn't deserve it, because that is a punishment. And so, you know, this episode is just kind of a follow-up from last week's. And I've got more to say on this, but not going to beat a dead horse today. But my question for you to leave you with, as we do question everything, right, is what can you decide to no longer make a thing? What is something you've been wrestling with that you're just sick of wrestling with, right? Like it's not changing. You're going back and forth. Part of you is like, does this even matter? Or maybe it does matter, but like, what would it look like to process over punishment? Um, Again, it's not giving a pass. It's not saying kumbaya, which it may be. It's not for me yet, maybe eventually, but it's coming from a higher energy place, a version, it's coming from a version of yourself that doesn't want to get caught in the crap. A version of yourself that's like, okay, I'm not going to make this a thing. Now, what do I do with that? And again, I made that decision on March 5th, 2022. But every day I am now living that decision. Um, it's kind of like, hey, you decide to lose weight. You don't just decide that and it happens, right? You decide to lose weight and then you watch what you eat and you take care of yourself and get sleep and water and work out and all that stuff, right? Like, but I'm curious, like, think on that. What is something that you just are going to decide to no longer make a thing? Maybe it's just a spousal argument that you always have, right? Maybe it's something that you've lived in the past, something you're really regretting that you've done, that you just ruminate and beat yourself up on and think on it and you're exhausted. Because again, punishment keeps us still. It just like punish, punish, punish. It's hard to move past punishment. So let's turn it into processing. So that's all I've got for episode 2 of Question Everything. Thank you for tuning in. Please share with me, share in the comments, excuse me, I'm on Instagram at Holly Krivo, HOLLYKRIVO, because I really want to know, like, what are you questioning these days? What do you want to know more about? What would you like to see on this? And again, I'd ask you to subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe, because I've got some juicy topics coming up, some juicy guests that I'm really excited, but I want to hear from you. Like, what are you questioning? What do you want to know more about? What are the topics that you're very curious about, but you're like, I don't know if I can ask somebody that? Those are the type of conversations I want us to have. Because when we question everything, everything changes.